segregation of work is really important, because if you try to do everything with one group of people, and they always going to get bogged down with all this reactive nature of procurement, having to deal with the things that are thrown at them. So now let's talk about, if we didn't have that reactive challenge, what's the ideal way to structure the work at procurement? So, I often talk to our clients about the pyramid of work. So what this pyramid of work is, at the top layer, you have strategic work. This is the work that is not reactive, it's actually proactive. It takes a strategic mindset, and it's about understanding your stakeholders, aligning with them. It's about understanding your suppliers and getting aligned with them. It's about, understanding your organization strategy and where you're headed, and how to plan your supplier strategies accordingly. So it's the most strategic nature of work when it comes to procurement. And that's it at the top. And then the middle layer is the tactical work. When I say tactical, it's really project-based. There's a beginning and an end that supports the strategy that's developed at the end. It's still complex work, but it needs to get done very effectively and efficiently, that is supported by a vision and a strategy that's defined by them. So these are your RFPs, your contracts, your supplier management projects, so your supplier risk projects. It's at the category level, at the project level. There's a beginning and an end, and you do many of them to realize, to identify and realize the value, right? The value could be savings, value could be innovation, value could be managed risk, it could be a number of things. And then the last layer, the bottom layer of the work, is transactional work, which is still very important. And the bottom of the pyramid is bigger and larger, right? Wider. So that defines that's the reactive part most of the time. That's you issuing POs and making sure suppliers get paid. It's doing change orders, putting in. So it's a very transactional in nature, but very, very important, because anything that goes wrong there usually bubbles up as a bigger problem. So if you don't have a way to address that, you won't have the ability to do your work at the higher ranks of the pyramid. So now that's the pyramid of work. So your resource model and your operating model needs to align with that. What most organizations, when we meet with them and look at them and talk and try to understand how they get the work done, there's only one pyramid without any layers of people, and they try to do these 3 layers of work. And guess what? Oftentimes there's time and ability and energy all sucked into the bottom layer, because that still needs to keep going. That's what operates procurement, and they have very little time to do the strategic work, and not enough time and ability to do the tactical work that puts the strategy in place. So that's why it's important to have an operating model in mind. And so what do we mean by an operating model? Let's talk about that now. It's really, think about what makes procurement work. So if you think about the analogy of a computer, an operating model makes the computer work. There are different parts of the computer, right? You got your CPU, you got your storage, you got your memory, and you got your display and your keyboard, etc. But what makes it all work is an operating model, right? It takes advantage of these resources that you have at your disposal and outputs something and meaningful. And the better your operating model, the easier to use, and the more likely that the end users will get the benefit and the value from it. So if the analogy is right, then when it comes to the procurement operating model, you have to think about where does get work done, by who and how, right? And there are certain things. So let's start with the bottom of the pyramid. So the nature of that work is very transactional. It needs to be quick. It needs to be accurate, and it needs to be cost effective, because there's many of those things that you're going to have to deal with. So that's, when you think about like automation and technology, there's a very highly application and utility of that to that type of work. And you want to leverage as little as human power in that compartment, in that room, to get that work done, and try to automate and leverage software to be able to govern that work and respond to it, right? And you also you have to make sure it's simpler. Oftentimes we do a lot of projects looking at the processes and simplify the processes, getting rework out, so that the goal again is to do this cheaper, faster, more responsive. So that's that, right? That's the transactional. Now we go to another room in the operating model, which is your project execution room, your tactical room, the middle layer. And again, the people that are doing that work should be different than people that are doing the transactional work, because A, the work is different. B, the number of projects they have to manage at one time is very different than the number of project transactions they have to manage. So they have to rewire themselves to be able to drive effectiveness through their projects, whether it's a sourcing project, whether that's a contracting project, whether that's a renegotiation project, or a supplier performance assessment project. These are your project managers who can take inputs, apply strategy, execute, and get to a result in an effective and efficient manner. And then, and certainly there's technology applied there as well in terms of collaboration, because that's a highly collaborative, function, to be able to collaborate with different functions to get a contract done or to do an RFP done. So there's definitely an application of technology, not as much in terms of proportion of technology to human, is not as much, but it's still there. And then the consumption of knowledge and expertise goes higher in that box as well, because the more you can collect and apply your knowledge and expertise and intelligence, outside intelligence, to your projects, the better outcomes you can drive, right? And then the top box is the one that's most ignored, but that's very, very relevant and very, very important, is the strategic one. It's where you set the vision, where you understand your spend, where you understand your suppliers, your stakeholders, and direct the rest of the work to be aligned with your vision and where you want to go. And that's the proactive part of procurement: category management, strategic alignment, stakeholder management. We call it different names. And without that, it's very difficult to align the work that happens at procurement with what the stakeholders want and what the overall company objectives are, right? So that's why it's very important. And the nature of the work, you may be doing one strategic plan in a year, not 10,000 transactions or 50 RFPs. It's one strategic plan. So the nature of the work, the mindset, is very different. To be able to do that work, you have to go out and meet with stakeholders, understand, incorporate their input. You have to go meet with your suppliers and understand what they expect, how to work better with them. You have to understand what's happening in the market with your domain, with your category. So there's a number of things that go into that, but it takes a different level of skill set, different level of mindset. And so when you put all those three things together and try to address it with one pool of people or one way to do it, you do a disservice to each of those areas. So that's why we talk about the procurement operating model, and we ask our clients to think of how do you move your organization towards that operating model that will bring the right talent into the right room or the right box, and making sure the right level of work gets dealt with in the right way, right? If that's the right way to describe it. Now, your question about what are some signs that you may see that your operating model is not working. And by the way, we've done a recent, benchmarking study, asked a lot of CPOs globally about, what are their top three initiatives, and 61% said that they were still working on their operating model. Only 13% said they were happy with their operating model. So that gives us a chunky 87% of CPOs and procurement organizations not happy with where they are with respect to operating model, which is quite daunting. So now let's talk about what are some of the signs that your operating model is not working. Well, I think you have to look at the speed of or just before the speed, look at the nature of the work. Where does most of your organization, your people, spend their time at? If the majority of their time is going to transactional and tactical work and not much time left to do that strategic piece at the top, your model is wrong, right? Either you don't have the right roles, you don't have the right capacity, or you don't have the right mindset. So that is one sign. A second sign is you're not aligned with your stakeholders. What you're trying to drive within the procurement organization is very different than what the stakeholders may want. You may want to drive cost savings, and they may want to go find new suppliers and drive speed to market. You may want to manage risk, but they may be like, hey, we need to get our diversity up and drive sustainability through our supply chain. So again, these objectives need to align, and whatever that the activities of procurement needs to align and meet towards that. That would be another sign. If your team is overworked, that means, again, you don't have the right model, simplified processes and automation applied to the right pieces, so that they're having to overcompensate for the work that's thrown at them. And because it's reactive, you can't stop. You got to keep fighting the fires and putting out fires, and that doesn't get better over time because it keeps piling up. So those are some signs. You don't have visibility into, you don't know what your team is going to work on next year. That's a big, you don't have pipeline. You don't have visibility into your projects, your strategic projects. Again, there's a bottleneck at the top. That means people are not thinking proactively. People are not planning their work because they don't have time, or that they lack the mindset and capability to do it. So those are some very vivid and signs that will tell you that you have an operating model problem.